Tonight on Steelers Talk, we're going to be breaking down the latest Steelers trade rumors, and then also make sure you guys stick around to the end of today's show for a reason for optimism when it comes to this week's Sunday Night Football matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. Make sure you guys give me a follow on X if you haven't already. I provide you guys free and informative content on the Pittsburgh Steelers there every single day. A lot of times I'll put out my takes on certain things when breaking news happens on the Pittsburgh Steelers, even before I give my take here on Steelers Talk. So if you guys want that content, I also put out film analysis up on there. My film study notes also go up on there each and every week on the Pittsburgh Steelers. So if you guys want even more Steelers content from me on X, I'm really close to 5,000 followers, guys, so I'd really appreciate it if you help me out here. I'm at Jack_Sperry if you guys want to help me out today. So now let's dive into some wide receiver names that are being thrown out in trade and even free agency rumors for the Pittsburgh Steelers with the trade deadline looming in just a few weeks. We'll start here with Andrew Filipponi, and of course you always have to take his reports with a grain of salt here, but he says rumor, 2 wide receivers on the Steelers' radar who will get traded for peanuts at the NFL trade deadline are veteran wideouts Brandin Cooks and Tyler Lockett, given Aaron Rodgers' penchant for professional route runners who will be in the right place at the right time. Both would be fits. Now, just so you guys know, Tyler Lockett actually is getting released by the Tennessee Titans today, so the Steelers can actually get him without having to trade for him. But as usual, take Pony quote-unquote reports with a grain of salt here. Now, I certainly think that these are 2 guys that are inexpensive, kind of wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 caliber of dudes that the Pittsburgh Steelers may be considering adding, but it's certainly the case that a lot of Steelers fans want the team to go out and get a bigger name. But let's talk about these guys as possibilities. We'll start with Brandin Cooks, all right? And, Brandin used to be, a legitimate starting caliber receiver that could, play on the outside as kind of a smaller guy, but he was really fast. He was a really good route runner, really good double move guy, really great vertical threat, as well as somebody that could get open to the short and intermediate levels of the field, had strong hands. All that's great stuff, but he is certainly a bit of a shell of his former self this year in New Orleans. Just 13 catches for 124 yards and no touchdowns. Certainly Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and those guys have been featured a bit more this year in NOLA with Spencer Rattler throwing them the football. And Brandin Cooks right now, man, he's 32 years old. I'm sure he's probably not going to have too many years left in the National Football League. But, he brings, he's maybe a little bit bigger than people think he is. 193 pounds isn't like crazy light. And he is pretty tough over the middle of the field. He still has good hands. He's still a pretty good and technically sound route runner. He's got pretty quick feet. He's kind of lost his speed at this point, but he's in the final year of his contract with the New Orleans Saints, and they're going to be in the middle of a fire sale. I'm pretty sure they would probably take him for like a 7th-round pick or maybe even a late-round pick swap. Like, you can really get him for close to nothing, in my opinion. And my take on Brandin Cooks, guys, is that he has pretty good hands still. He can still make some tough catches. His best highlight of the year was kind of a weird body control type of catch where he's contorting his body and he caught it with one hand on a poorly thrown ball by Spencer Rattler. And he can run decent routes. So, if you're looking for a route runner that can get open versus man coverage, Brandin Cooks can still do that. But because he's lost his speed, he can't really separate vertically. Now, the Steelers don't necessarily need that. They've got a lot of vertical threats that can run on this team, and he's not much of a yak threat, but certainly the Steelers have plenty of those kinds of guys as well. So if you're looking for a possession/route running type of wide receiver that's not going to give you much juice as a deep threat or as a yak threat, and you're just looking for somebody that's going to have reliable hands, somebody that can make tough catches, somebody that can run good routes and separate versus man coverage as a wide receiver 3, Brandin Cooks might make a lot of sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers in that regard, and that's how this whole kind of situation would work. He would not take over Calvin Austin III's role as the number 2 receiver or anything like that. He'd be more of a number 3 or number 4 piece. But like I said, guys, Pittsburgh could get him for a super low price. The New Orleans is going to be selling pieces off, and they're going to be stockpiling picks for the NFL draft next year. So if the Steelers want to do a pick swap of some kind in the late rounds or just give them a 7th-round pick, I think that might be enough to get this deal done and get a route runner here in Pittsburgh. Certainly some other guys that I would rather add to the Steelers team, but I could understand the reasoning why the Steelers would potentially make that move. And then for Tyler Lockett, he was actually released by the Tennessee Titans today This was reported by Adam Schefter from ESPN today, saying veteran wide receiver Tyler Lockett has asked for and received his release from the Tennessee Titans. Per source, Lockett is expected to be free to sign with another team after 4 p.m. on Wednesday. So definitely another name to keep your eye out for on the free agency market, specifically because the Steelers wouldn't have to give up any draft picks to acquire him. But, in Tennessee this year, just 8 catches for 52 yards. He wasn't doing anything. And frankly, last year in Seattle, he didn't have a really great season either. I think that he's somebody that, is getting older. He's 33 years old, and, this is just what happens, okay? You lose a little bit of a step, and I think Lockett has lost a step, and, he's going to be looking for a team that he can go in, and I'm sure he'll be interested in the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll see how Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan feel about him. Certainly a name to monitor just because he's free, essentially, to acquire for, like, the vet minimum, but he hadn't been getting the ball a whole lot in Tennessee this year, and personally, I'm not looking to add a Tyler Lockett type player to the Pittsburgh Steelers offense, guys. I think he's lost his step, so his verticality, and what really made him special back in the day was his ability to separate down the field, be a great deep threat, all that stuff. I think he's lost that ability, and he's still a decent route runner, short and intermediate levels of the field. But honestly, if you're looking for a guy of that role, I would rather go out and get a guy like Brandin Cooks, who can still run routes better than Lockett can, and I think he's got tougher hands than Lockett does. So my take on the whole Tyler Lockett kind of idea, guys, is I would have liked to add him maybe, last offseason, to pair him up with Russell Wilson. He had great chemistry with Russell Wilson back in the day, and I would have been down for this last year maybe, but like this year, you don't have Russell Wilson anymore. Lockett has shown on film for 2 straight years that he's not the same player that he used to be. So, could you do worse in free agency than Tyler Lockett? I guess, but I honestly wouldn't be too jazzed about this, guys, and I'm not sure how productive he'd be if the Steelers brought him in. And if you want to talk about free agents, like, I honestly think I would rather have Marquez Valdes-Scantling compared to Tyler Lockett. Unlike Lockett, MVS actually still has his speed. He put up some pretty good numbers in New Orleans last year as a true deep threat. And honestly, San Francisco didn't use MVS in the way that maybe I would have as a true deep threat. They used him as kind of like an underneath kind of guy, as kind of somebody that would just sit down and be like a check down option. Here in Pittsburgh, I think Aaron Rodgers would advocate for MVS to actually be, unleashed and to be, used as a true deep threat in this offense. To take the top off the offense, open things up underneath for DK and Calvin, and your other players and your tight ends, of course. And, I think that, if I had the choice between MVS and Tyler Lockett, neither of those guys are ideal options in my opinion. But personally, I'd rather go with the guy that's faster and somebody that has more experience with the quarterback here in Pittsburgh. So take your pick for me down there in the comment section. None of these guys are ideal. I understand that. But if the Steelers are looking for an inexpensive veteran option to add to this group, which I think is actually probably likely, which one would you rather add? Would you like to trade, like a 7th-round pick for Brandin Cooks, or would you like to sign Tyler Lockett in free agency, or would you rather go get MVS? Let me know your answer to this question down there in the comment section for today's pinned question. Just a second here, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor today at Omaha Steaks. And while I'm telling you about our friends at Omaha Steaks today, let me know which veteran receiver you would prefer out of these 3. And with that, let's have a word from our sponsor today at Omaha Steaks. And Omaha Steaks is the official sponsor of tailgating this football season. From legendary burgers to mouthwatering steaks, deli-style franks, and so much more, you'll elevate your next game day get-together with America's original butcher. And now, with this exclusive offer, you can get $35 off at omahasteaks.com with promo code STEELERS at checkout. Terms apply. See site for details. Omaha Steaks has been America's original butcher since 1917. Every steak is perfectly aged to maximize tenderness and hand-cut by master butchers in America's heartland. Grass-fed, grain-finished beef has more marbling for exceptional flavor and is the choice of steakhouses and professional chefs around the world. Omaha Steaks offers unrivaled quality and variety, and every bite is backed by their 100% guarantee. And they also carry mouth-watering burgers, chicken, pork, seafood, plus delectable desserts. Anything that you guys could want from a butcher, Omaha Steaks brings it to the table. Now, for me personally, guys, Cassie and I, we absolutely love to cook steak. We're actually going to be having it tonight for Monday Night Football. So we get our steaks from Omaha Steaks. We order them in bulk because you can get them at such great prices. If you use our code STEELERS at checkout, you guys can get $35 off your order today. I cannot recommend Omaha Steaks enough. If you want to get some premium quality steaks for a great price, make game day delicious this year with the official sponsor of Tailgating with Omaha Steaks today. Visit omahasteaks.com and get $35 off with promo code Steelers at checkout. That's omahasteaks.com and promo code Steelers at checkout. Terms apply. See site for details, and a big thank you to Omaha Steaks for sponsoring today's edition of Steelers Talk. Another name that's being floated around out there, and that's somebody that's more of like a quote-unquote legit wide receiver too in trade rumors to the Pittsburgh Steelers, is Tennessee Titans wide receiver Calvin Ridley. All right, and this name has been floated out there a lot, including by former Steeler offensive lineman Trey Essex. And by the way, Trey is a great follow on X. I highly recommend you check out his stuff. He has some great analysis of the Steelers offensive line. But he says here, I have zero sources, so he acknowledges that up front. But he says, haven't seen or even read this anywhere, but I just have this feeling that we may be in play for Calvin Ridley. He has 2 years left after this year for $20 million per season, not guaranteed. Very cap friendly for a top-end number 2 wide receiver. A third-rounder may do it for a Titans team in the midst of a probable fire sale. So let's talk about Calvin Ridley here, guys, because I agree with Trey that this is probably going to be a little bit of an under-the-radar kind of sneaky wide receiver target that I think could be somewhat realistic for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That is if they are looking for like a 1B type of option to DK Metcalf or like a quote-unquote legit wide receiver too. Now, the thing about Ridley is that he is an electric deep threat. He's got incredible vertical speed, and his quickness and route running ability is really, really awesome as well. So if you're looking for somebody that can get open versus man and stretch the field vertically and bring some pretty decent size to the table at 6'1", 190 pounds, Calvin Ridley may be your guy, man. Plus, he's a veteran. He's been around the block. He's probably looking for a chance to win while he still has his legs with him. And like Trey mentioned here, he's under contract for this year plus 2 more years, but those years are not guaranteed. So if he's playing well and he's worth that money, the Steelers can keep him around. If not, they can just let him go with no dead cap charge attributed to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Okay, so it's certainly something where I would be interested if the Tennessee Titans are willing to let him go, but that really is the question, right? Does Tennessee see a 30-year-old Calvin Ridley as a part of their future with Cam Ward? I would say he hasn't had a particularly great start developing a connection with Cam Ward. The big bugaboo with him in his profile is that he doesn't have great hands. He's not a great contested catch guy. He'll have concentration drops, so he can be a little bit frustrating as a player in that way, and he is expensive. So, Tennessee is going to be getting ready to bring in another new head coach next offseason, and, do they really want to kickstart this rebuild with Cam Ward at quarterback at the helm with a then 31-year-old expensive Calvin Ridley? And if the plan is to just release him at the end of the season anyway, you might as well trade him at the deadline and get something for him. So I actually think this one is a lot more realistic than some people may be willing to acknowledge here. The Titans season is over. They've already fired their head coach. I think that this one is certainly within play, but something to keep in mind here, guys, is that Ridley is dealing with a hamstring injury right now. So the big question for me is, A, is Tennessee really shopping him? I think the answer could be yes there, but then the other question is, is he healthy with that hamstring injury? And we just don't know what the answer is to that question. But if Ridley is healthy, I would be completely down for the Pittsburgh Steelers to go get him. Okay, if the Steelers want to run more 3 wide receiver stuff and they want to have DK at the 1, Ridley at the 2, Calvin Austin at the 3, that's one of the best wide receiver trios in football right there. It would be an immediate upgrade to this wide receiver room. Okay, so he puts out a 3rd-round pick. Trey does in his trade idea. Personally, I would probably rather do a 4th-round pick, because if he stinks or he continues to get injured and the Steelers want to let him go, then you're giving up a 3rd-round pick for somebody you're releasing after just a half a season. But I think a 4th-round pick is probably what I would offer, guys. But let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. If this is the price to go get Calvin Ridley, are you accepting it or are you declining it? Type A for accept or D for decline. Let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. Now, we still have one more to talk about on today's show in terms of wide receiver targets, guys. And we all know that Jakobi Meyers is a potential trade target for the Pittsburgh Steelers. All right, he didn't play last week versus Kansas City. He requested a trade before the season even began. The Raiders season is done, and they're going to be selling at the deadline. There's certainly reason to believe that Jakobi Meyers is going to be on the move before the trade deadline. We all know that that's a very in-play option for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But some are now throwing out the idea of Tre Tucker, their smaller, speedier wide receiver, as the potential fit for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Ian Rappaport from NFL Network did say that the Steelers could be looking for a vertical threat, somebody that's a speedy kind of deep threat, and Tre Tucker would fit that description more than Jakobi Meyers. This is what Jacob Panturi from Sports Illustrated, Pittsburgh Steelers, had to say about this idea. He threw this out there. He said, Jakobi Meyers is the trade target the Raiders are most likely to move on from. The Steelers should be targeting his speedier counterpart, Tre Tucker. He posted over 500 receiving yards last year, and he's going to surpass that shortly in 2025 with 389 yards and 4 touchdowns already. The 24-year-old pass catcher is undersized at 5'8", but he possesses lightning-quick feet and precise route running skills. Kind of sounds like somebody that I know on the Steelers roster already. But you take a look at Tre Tucker, still on his rookie contract, only 24 years old, 5'8", 182 pounds. He's heavier than Calvin Austin III, but a very similar type of player. Very speedy, very undersized, kind of vertical threats that can also run routes to all 3 levels of the field. Very quick feet. He's also pretty darn good after the catch. And, he's got 1 year left on his rookie contract after this one. So if you trade for him, you get not only the rest of this season on a cheap deal, but also a really cheap number for him next year. Now, he might be looking for a new contract next offseason, especially if he keeps the production up that he's been putting up to start this season. But honestly, I kind of doubt Las Vegas is going to trade Tucker at this point. He's been probably their most effective wide receiver this year in terms of stuff in the stat sheet. Getting open for Geno Smith. He's developed a pretty decent connection with Geno, even though Geno's sucking it up right now in Vegas. But another thing here, guys, is do the Pittsburgh Steelers really want another super tiny route running kind of deep threat receiver in like a Calvin Austin III clone? Honestly, I'm not sure if they want that, especially because they already have other players behind Calvin Austin III in this wide receiver room. Roman Wilson, Scotty Miller. They've got a lot of these kind of smaller, deep threat types of guys already. Do they really want to add another one in Tre Tucker? I'm not too sure of that. I think that they would like to add somebody with a bit more size that can also stretch the field. Maybe somebody that's got a little bit more size and can separate versus man coverage and help out Aaron Rodgers in that way. But I don't think the Raiders are going to be letting go of a 24-year-old player that's been producing really well for them, still on his rookie contract. For a rebuilding team, I don't think there's much incentive to trade him. I think Jakobi Meyers is on an expiring contract. He already wants out. He's getting older. I think that piece makes a lot more sense to trade away. So I just don't see Tre Tucker as a realistic option for the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. Now we'll shift here to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's Jerry Dulac, who said this week that Pittsburgh is, quote-unquote, not actively looking for a wide receiver trade. He says that they're always looking and they're always, open-minded to making moves, but they're not actively looking for a wide receiver trade. This is what Jerry had to say this week. I think if you see them go get a wide receiver, it's going to be the equivalent of Mike Williams, what they did last year. I don't know that they're actively pursuing it, but I can tell you they're always looking. But I don't think they're ready to push any kind of button to say we need to get a second wide receiver, number 2 wide receiver, because you're seeing what they're doing with all their different tight ends. And listen, man, just a little bit of a joke here. If Jerry's past is any indication where he has said something's not going to happen and then it does happen, follows suit here, a wide receiver trade for the Pittsburgh Steelers is right around the corner, all right? So if Jerry says it's not happening, maybe something's going to be happening here within the next 48 hours. But in all seriousness, I do think Jerry does make some sense here, all right? And I can't believe I'm saying that, but, the Steelers do run a lot of heavy tight end personnel packages, and they're paying Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth a lot of money. They're using Spencer Anderson a lot in their jumbo personnel looks. They're using Darnell Washington a lot, obviously, because he is arguably one of the more valuable offensive pieces for the Steelers offense this season. So they are using these tight ends a lot, and they want to get these guys the football, and they want to get those guys, the usage that frankly, hasn't been there at points during the first 6 weeks of the season. So, I'm looking at, all the 12 and 13 personnel looks. And in those 12 and 13 personnel looks, you have either 2 or 1 receiver on the field at a time, okay? And whether you as a Steelers fan or I or anybody else likes it or not, the Pittsburgh Steelers do in fact like Calvin Austin III and believe he is a legitimate wide receiver too. All right, I think that is the case, and they have said it time and time and time again. They went into the season with him as their number 2 receiver for a reason, and, I think a lot of people see Calvin's size and all these different things, and they think that he's not a good player or that he is an underwhelming player or he's a specialist. But, listen, man, people view Tank Dell as somebody at a very similar size, as a legitimate starting wide receiver, as a great route runner, as a vertical threat, all these different things. And in Pittsburgh's eyes, I think Calvin is this team's Tank Dell, all right? Somebody that is severely undersized, but somebody that creates a lot of separation, somebody that brings a lot of speed to the table, and somebody that can win to all 3 levels of the field. And if you compare Tank Dell with Calvin Austin III, you guys can see the comparison is very, very similar, okay? Both of them are very small. Then they've got, the weight there. Very similar weight. Then the average throughout the course of their career in terms of yards per catch, very similar there. Then yards per target, right around the same range as well. And then they catch a very similar proportion of the passes thrown their way. All right, so these 2 players, very similar caliber guys in my opinion, but whereas Tank Dell gets talked about like he's a legitimate, number 2 type receiver, elite route runner, all these different things, Calvin Austin III gets pushed to the side as like a wide receiver 3 stock kind of speed threat, punt return guy that's not an actual starting wide receiver. But I think if you actually watch the film on Calvin Austin III over the last 2 seasons in particular, you would see somebody that gets open a ton, who's got super quick feet, who's got an incredible ability to get open down the field, and then also he makes tougher catches than he gets credit for as well, man. He's made some tough catches for this team over the last 2 years despite his size. And, I think that he is this team's number 2 wide receiver, and the Steelers feel pretty confident in him as that number 2 receiving option. Then if you look at it from that perspective where there's only really 2 starting wide receivers in this offense, Roman Wilson is kind of a younger option, somebody that can come in who's shown some really good things on tape over the last 2 weeks with Calvin out of the lineup. You can make an argument that Roman is a pretty good first backup to this group. All right, now I think that it's pretty reasonable to think that Pittsburgh could add a number 3 or number 4 caliber type of wide receiver just to add more depth here. Scotty Miller, when he's been on the field this year, has done absolutely nothing, okay? So maybe they do want to add that 4th piece where if somebody gets injured, you still have a very solid trio that you can turn to and go to 11 personnel if you want. But is it a surefire bet that they're going to go out and get a Jacoby Myers or a Calvin Ridley or a Chris Olave, somebody that can be a quote-unquote legitimate wide receiver too? Honestly, if you would ask me right now, I think the more likely scenario is they get a wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4 caliber guy at a low price tag, which is why I think the most likely target is Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Or he's a Super Bowl champion. He still has his speed with him. He was on target for a prorated yardage there in New Orleans of over 800 yards. That is a wide receiver 2 kind of production right there. He's still a legitimate deep threat, can still track the ball in the air. He has that chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. Is MVS a game-changing type of guy that's going to, put up 1,000 yards here in Pittsburgh or, be a long-term starter here? Probably not, but can he help the Steelers win a Super Bowl and not have to give up a draft pick in order to get him into the rotation? I think that's going to be something that that is very appealing to the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is why if and when Marquez Valdes-Scantling gets healthy, I think he's probably the most likely target for the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you want to hear me talk about more when it comes to the fit between MVS and the Pittsburgh Steelers, why I think the Steelers will be interested in him this year, we put out a video on it yesterday. I'll put the chip to that one in the top right and the link to it in the comments and description of today's show. So predict it for me down there in the comments section. Will the Pittsburgh Steelers add a quote-unquote legit wide receiver 2 before the trade deadline this year? Personally, I don't think it's as surefire as some people think, but let me know what you guys think. Down there in the comments section, give me a yes or a no for your prediction. Now, before I go here, I do have some final items that I want to discuss with you guys here on a Monday as we prepare for Packers week here in week 8. I want to start with the updated AFC North standings where the Steelers still sit in first place, but after that loss to the Cincinnati Bengals, it's a lot closer than we were hoping for at this point. We were hoping that, you take care of business against Cincinnati. You're sitting at 5-1. The Bengals are sitting at 2-5. Cleveland ended up winning their game versus Miami, so they'd be sitting at 2-5, and then Baltimore would be sitting at 1-5. And you have a 3.5 game gap between you and the number 2 team in the division. But you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're just. They're just ahead of the Cincinnati Bengals at this point, just a game and a half. Sorry, it says +1. It's a game and a half right now in front of Cincinnati. But with the Ravens being favored in their next several ball games, they got a pretty soft schedule over the next 6 games or so, and the Pittsburgh Steelers schedule getting tougher and tougher as the season goes on. That advantage that they have over Baltimore right now, and even Cincinnati. I mean, Cincinnati moved the ball quite well with Joe Flacco on Thursday. It's a little bit too close for comfort at this point is what I'd say. But we can move forward here with Justin Fields, who was benched last week, or on Sunday, I should say, in their game versus the Carolina Panthers. And, outside of that week 1 game where he played actually pretty well against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, he hasn't been able to do anything with that New York Jets offense. And it certainly seems, at least at this point, that the Pittsburgh Steelers avoided a major bullet, not bringing him back and paying him a large contract, all right? Like, if they would have matched that New York Jets contract and they would have paid him $20 or more million per season to come back and be this team's starting quarterback, and they would have been on the hook for $30 or more million guaranteed over the course of that contract, I mean, that would have been bad, man. That would have been a tough situation. The Jets are in a tough situation right now because their cap hit for Fields next offseason is going to be pretty sizable if they move on from him, which they likely will. And now, not even halfway into the season, he's going to get benched probably in New York. And it's just a tough situation for Justin. We were really rooting for him to go to New York and play well. And I was happy he played well against the Steelers, especially because the Steelers still beat him. But, it's just been a tough situation for Justin in New York. But, hey, man, give the Pittsburgh Steelers organization credit, all right? They were panned by this fan base for pursuing Aaron Rodgers. And not only did they get Rodgers for a far lower contract figure than Justin Fields, not only did the guarantees only extend to 1 year because it's just a 1-year contract instead of over multiple years like the Justin Fields one, but also Aaron Rodgers has just been playing way better than Justin Fields. And, for the people saying, oh, the Jets are terrible, of course Rodgers is playing better here than Justin is in New York. Rodgers is playing better right now in his first 6 games as a Steeler than Justin Fields did in his first 6 games as a Steeler last year, and it's not even close. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is on pace to have 35-plus touchdown passes this year. Like, he has been absolutely phenomenal to start this year. He's been one of the most efficient red zone quarterbacks in the league. He's got 10 downfield touchdown passes this year, so that's touchdown passes of 10-plus air yards. He is finding weaknesses in opposing defenses. He's playing smart football. He's getting the ball out in space to his playmakers, but he's also not afraid to push the ball down the field like we saw in that game versus the Cincinnati Bengals. So it's without question at this point in a win-now season, the Pittsburgh Steelers made the right call. Aaron Rodgers certainly would have given the Pittsburgh Steelers a better shot to win a Super Bowl this year. And, I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers certainly made the right call going with him. And speaking of Rodgers, he'll be playing his former team on Sunday Night Football this Sunday. It's going to be a very exciting week getting ready for this matchup here. And, of course, the Steelers are going to be wearing those rugby-esque, uniforms with the matte gold helmets. It's going to be a very interesting look for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But there is a very good reason to hope that the Pittsburgh Steelers, after just losing to the Cincinnati Bengals and Joe Flacco, can come out with a victory versus the Packers at home. All right? And that reason is that coming off of a Thursday night loss in the Mike Tomlin era, the Pittsburgh Steelers are 7-2 all-time under the Tomlin era off of those kinds of losses. Plus, the Steelers are home. Plus, this team is going to be jacked up to try and get Aaron Rodgers a win versus his former team. And probably the only game he plays, unless they meet up in the Super Bowl this year, where he is playing the Green Bay Packers in his entire career. So I'm sure Aaron wants to get this win, almost just as bad as he wanted to win against the New York Jets. His former head coach, he's going to be going up against the quarterback that they replaced him with. I mean, this is going to be a game that Aaron Rodgers is going to be ultimately motivated. And when you give Mike Tomlin extra time to prepare for an opponent, usually the Steelers do very well. So whether it's a bye week, whether it's a mini bye week, the Steelers are usually very, very good when they get extra time to prepare for an opponent. And because of that, I think the Steelers will be at the very least very competitive on Sunday night versus the Packers. Now, tomorrow I'm going to have my Week 8 preview. It's going to be coming out early on in the day. It's going to be our first video before we go live for our first live show of the week, which will start at 5 p.m. Eastern time, by the way. But make sure you have your notifications turned on. You've clicked that subscribe button to never miss any of our videos. Of course, there's going to be more trade speculation that comes out in the days and weeks to come. We're going to have our preview, injury updates, all that stuff. And, of course, it all culminates in our Week 8 watch party on Sunday Night Football coming up on Sunday night. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button to never miss any of the extensive Steelers coverage we give to you guys right here on Steelers Talk.